Hi, my name is Ernie Kleiman and I've been making instruments, wood, and cabinet making for about 35 years now. And today I'd like to talk about purfling and banding around the ukulele. But this applies to a lot of other facets of woodworking as well, like making other instruments like guitars, furniture, and so on. On this tenor ukulele over here, as you can see, I've cut out a rabbet. One part of the cut over here is a top edge over here for the purfling, which is a narrow piece of wood, and the next piece that goes back behind it is called the banding. And I've routed out both the top and the back. And in the center over here, on the sides, on the ribs, I've put what I call a butt graft. It's basically about 3 pieces of wood. It's a piece of cherry, a piece of cocoa bolo, and a piece of maple in a line. I don't know if you can see it or not. I'll just show it to you over there. And the way I do that is I use a laminate trimmer. This one's from Harbor Freight, but any good quality laminate trimmer with a good carbide blade should be able to cut that ledge or rabbet or rebate in Anglo-Saxon English. So you need a trimmer with an edge guide and a good carbide bit. This one's about, it's called an end mill. It's got a 1/4 inch shank and a 3 millimeter or 1/8 of an inch cutting bit. Now, I suggest go slowly on your first one. When you're practicing cutting your initial setups for your purfling and banding, practice your cuts first and then measure afterwards to make sure that they're slightly undersized, the banding and purfling that you plan to use. Now, the other thing I was going to talk about is there's a lot of things you can do to make your instruments really stand out and be creative. And on this table over here, I've got quite a whole bunch of different bandings and purflings. Here's a chevron pattern, or wheat, which I don't suggest you make for your first try. This one's a little crooked. It's extremely difficult to make because all the pieces of veneer have to be cut on a bias. Here's another, a little simpler one. Basically a piece of bocote that's about 30 inches long, about 2.5 millimeters or 3/32 of an inch thick, and about 1/4 of an inch high or 6.5 millimeters high. And here's some banding that was created using offcuts of bocote and laminate with 2 pieces of 0.6 millimeter 20 thou maple veneer, which go around on the inside of the ukulele. That's called purfling. The stuff that goes around the outside is called the banding. And here's more samples. I've got some Southeast Asian rosewood, which is really thin. It's about 1 millimeter, about a 25th of an inch by about 6 millimeters, 1/4 inch by about 20 inches long. And similarly, I've got a whole bunch of other woods here that I've used. Here's strips of Ipe, Brazilian walnut, quarter sawn, Pernambuco, and dyed pear wood, local pear wood from the backyard here, from a pear wood tree. Sycamore can be used, more Pernambuco. Here's another set of binding. You can make your own binding by gluing on a small piece of thin veneer to the purfling strips that you cut on your bandsaw. I recommend cutting a lot of this stuff on the bandsaw. I mean, you could do it on the table saw, but there's just a lot more waste. And unless you're using a really thin veneer blade, you're going to get a lot of waste. I typically like to do this on a 6-tooth small bandsaw, which I have downstairs. Here's more samples. Quarter sawn maple can be used. Any hard, dense hardwood is pretty good for using your banding and your purfling. Make sure it's hard and it's dense, so it'll bend around the corners when you go to bend it on your instrument. I don't recommend any open pored woods because generally they're very hard to scrape when trying to sand them, and they leave little pockets and undulations in the wood. Typical open grain woods are mahogany sometimes works okay, depends how dense it is. Oak, locust, ash, all those open type pores in the wood are difficult to use for purfling and banding, and I don't recommend you use them. Cherry is good if you can find some straight grain cherry. Here I've got a piece of white soft maple laminated to a piece of cherry wood. And it's approximately about 8 millimeters, or just under 3/8 of an inch, and about 1/8 of an inch thick and 32 inches long. Over here I've got some straight purfling. It's about 2.5 millimeters or 3/32 of an inch by 1/4 inch by 20 inches long for the ukulele. It's basically Honduran rosewood, which I resawed on the small bandsaw. Start simply and work up, start laminating little pieces together, and then you can create a lot of decorative effects with your instruments. The other thing I was going to show was when you're gluing up your bandings and purflings, make sure you have a lot of spring clamps. I think I got these at a surplus store in St. Louis many years ago, and they're extremely handy for gluing up really small, thin pieces of wood. And you can never have too many. I think I've got about a couple of hundred of these, and they're really, really cheap and inexpensive. I think you might be able to get these at Harbor Freight, but I'm not really sure. So let me review again. If you're going to be cutting your purfling and banding, make sure you use a very sharp blade to cut the binding ledge and the purfling ledge. I recommend using carbide. Frankly, using a Dremel tool will work, but it's very slow, and sometimes there's a bit of run out in the Dremel tool itself, which makes for a very uneven cut. You've got to come back and do a lot of cleanup work around the rabbet or around the rebate. Secondly, I strongly recommend you use a yellow alphatic resin glue. White glue will work, but Titebond works a lot better because it can withstand the temperatures that you're going to be using to bend your purfling around the sides. White glue might delaminate, so depending on the type of glue you're using, keep that in mind. You want a nice glue that dries quickly and is nice and hard. And also get a good trimmer. A lot of this work can be done by hand with a chisel and a blade, but frankly it's too time consuming and I don't have the patience for it myself. And thirdly I should say, make sure you used hardwoods only. Dense, tight grain, closed pore hardwoods. Thank you. And if you need more information or have any questions, please email me at www.ateliertommy.com.